Mr. Malloy, you have 72 hours to secure this site and stop all work. The building inspector did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He stood at the edge of my backyard in a yellow safety vest, holding a clipboard beneath a cloudless Southern California sky, while a half-built swimming pool sat 11 feet across an easement that had been recorded before either Derek Malloy or I had ever heard of Arroyo Crest. Derek laughed. He was wearing mirrored sunglasses, a navy polo shirt, and the expression of a man who had spent enough money to believe reality should become negotiable. "You're shutting down a $200,000 project over gravel?" he said. The inspector looked past him at the concrete shell, the exposed rebar, and the freshly poured retaining wall footings. "No," he said. "I'm shutting it down because the construction does not match the approved plans, and because the work may be obstructing a recorded drainage and access easement." Derek looked at me through the open gate. "This is because of her." I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I did not. Mostly, I felt tired, because for 3 weeks before that inspector arrived, I had done everything I could to keep a simple property issue from turning into a disaster. I had talked to Derek directly. I had shown him the documents. I had asked him to pause. I had given him every reasonable opportunity to move a few lines on a plan before concrete trucks, contractors, city inspectors, and county engineers became part of his life. But Derek had looked at an old map, decided that it was inconvenient, and treated inconvenience like proof that the map did not matter. My name is Anna Mercer. I had lived in Arroyo Crest, a hillside neighborhood outside San Diego. For 14 years, when Derek bought the house behind mine, Arroyo Crest looked like a postcard from the street. Curved cul-de-sacs, cream stucco houses, red tile roofs, bougainvillea spilling over low walls, landscaped yards full of agave, leonor, olive trees, and gravel arranged to look effortless. But the neighborhood was built on a slope above a narrow canyon. Under the patios, fences, and expensive backyard renovations, there were retaining systems, drainage channels, utility lines, and recorded access routes that existed for one reason. When California got rain, the hillside had somewhere safe to send it. Most years, people forgot about that. Then a storm came through, and suddenly everyone remembered why the developer had put those easements there in the first place. My house sat at the upper end of Juniper Bluff Court, behind my garage. Along the rear edge of my property was a 12-foot gravel corridor. It ran beside my fence, crossed the back corner of Derek's lot, and connected to a locked steel gate on Canyon View Drive. The corridor was not attractive. It was not meant to be. It contained a stormwater cleanout, a shallow rock-lined swale, and access space for the Arroyo Crest Water and Drainage District. The recorded document called it a non-exclusive drainage, maintenance, an emergency access easement. My lot benefited from it because runoff from the uphill homes passed through that system. The district benefited because its crews needed a way to reach the buried line without cutting through someone's living room or tearing up private landscaping during an emergency. I knew about it because it had come up when I bought the house. My realtor had pointed to the gravel strip during the final walkthrough and said, "You can landscape around it, but don't block it. It's one of those things nobody notices until they need it." For 14 years, nobody needed it. I kept it clear anyway. I trimmed weeds there twice a year. I replaced the gravel after a utility truck left ruts one winter. When my neighbor, before Derek had installed a new fence, he had paid extra to put a removable panel near the access gate, just in case district crews ever needed wider entry. That was the kind of neighborhood Arroyo Crest had been when I moved in. People did not always love the rules, but they understood that the hill had rules of its own. Then Derek Malloy arrived. The house behind mine had belonged to a retired couple named Howard and Sheila Baines. They had lived there for nearly 20 years. Their backyard was plain but peaceful, a small lawn, 2 citrus trees, a pergola, and a view down toward the canyon. When the Baineses moved to Oregon to be closer to their daughter, Derek bought the house for cash. He introduced himself the week after closing. He was friendly enough at first. He said he worked in commercial property acquisitions. He said his girlfriend, Marisa, loved the neighborhood but wanted something more resort-like in the backyard. I remember smiling and saying, "That sounds nice." At the time, I had no idea resort-like meant turning a modest hillside yard into an infinity pool, a sunken conversation pit, an outdoor bar, a glass panel railing, a built-in kitchen, and a raised deck with lights that could probably be seen from the International Space Station. Within days, demolition crews arrived. The Baines's lemon trees disappeared first, then the pergola, then the lawn, then most of the soil in the yard. Derek's contractors worked quickly. They parked trucks along the curb, hauled out loads of dirt, and brought in surveyors, plumbers, electricians, and a landscape designer who wore white sneakers on a construction site and kept calling everything a visual moment. I did not complain. It was his yard. I had renovated my kitchen 2 years earlier. I understood that construction was loud, messy, and temporary. The crews were polite when they crossed the street. They did not block my driveway. They cleaned up most evenings. I had no reason to think the project would involve me. That changed on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was coming home from the grocery store when I noticed a man in a hard hat hammering orange stakes into the gravel corridor behind my house. He had stretched a blue chalk line diagonally across it. The line ran from the corner of Derek's lot toward the canyon fence, exactly where the easement was supposed to remain open. I walked through my side gate and called out, "Excuse me, what are you marking?" The man looked up. He was young, maybe 25, with a tape measure clipped to his belt. "Pool layout," he said. "Through this area?" He glanced at the papers in his hand. "Owner says it's all clear." I pointed at the gravel strip. "That is a recorded drainage and access easement." He frowned. "I'm just laying out the dig lines." "Mom, you'll have to talk to the owner." I thanked him and went back inside. I did not panic. Not yet. People mixed up property lines all the time. Contractors relied on rough plans. Homeowners said things confidently because they had misunderstood what they read during closing. I assumed Derek had received a simplified site drawing and had not looked at the title documents closely. So I called him. He answered on the fifth ring. "Anna, what's up? Your crew is marking the gravel corridor behind my house for excavation." I said, "I think there may be a mistake. That section is part of the drainage easement." There was a pause. Then he said, "No, it isn't." "It is. I have the recorded document. I had a title review done before I bought the place. Then maybe we should compare them before work starts." He exhaled through his nose, already annoyed. "Anna, the city approved the pool. The architect did the plans. My contractor has been doing this for 20 years. There is no mystery easement in the middle of my backyard. It's not a mystery. It runs behind both of our houses." "The old gravel strip?" "Yes. That thing hasn't been used in forever. It does not have to be used every day to remain an easement. You're worried about a dirt path? I'm worried about access to the drainage line." Derek's tone cooled. "I'm building a pool, not a shopping center. You're not losing anything. I'm not asking you to cancel your project." I said, "I'm asking you to confirm that your plans leave the corridor clear." "Everything is permitted," he said. "If there were a real issue, the city would have caught it." Then he added, "I've got people here. I can't keep debating this." And he ended the call. The next morning, the excavation started. I heard the machine before I saw it. The low growl of an excavator drifted through my kitchen window at 73A. By the time I reached my side gate, the crew had already torn away the old gravel path. The cleanout cap was gone. A section of the rock-lined swale had been dug out. A machine with steel tracks was cutting a trench where water was supposed to pass during storms, lifting soil and dropping it into piles along the rear boundary. I called over the foreman, a man named Vince Calder. He was older than the first worker I had met, broad across the shoulders, with sun-faded tattoos on his arms and a hard hat that had seen a lot of job sites. "Vinks," I said, introducing myself. "I need you to stop for a moment. This is a recorded easement." He wiped sweat from his forehead and looked toward Derek's house. "Mr. Malloy said you might come by. That does not make the easement disappear. We're working from approved drawings. Can I see them?" He hesitated, then handed me a laminated site plan. At first glance, it looked professional. There was the house footprint, the patio, the proposed pool, the raised spa, and the retaining wall. A narrow dashed line ran near the rear property boundary. It was labeled, "Drainage setback 6 feet." I looked from the plan to the excavation. The drawing was wrong in 2 separate ways. First, the recorded corridor was 12 feet wide, not 6. Second, the excavation was wider than the pool shown on the plan. The real dig line had pushed several feet beyond the approved shell outline and directly into the corridor. I handed the plan back to Vince. "This is not accurate," I said. He looked uncomfortable. "I can't make that call." "Then please call Derek." Derek came outside 10 minutes later, holding a coffee cup in one hand. He looked at the trench, at the plan, and then at me. "You're still on this? The plan calls this a 6-foot setback." I said, "The recorded easement is 12 feet, and your excavation is across it." He gave the paper a quick glance. "That's a design note." "It is not just a design note. It is access for a drainage system. No one is driving trucks through my yard. They may need to. May need to is not the same as will need to." "Derek, I have the document. You can read it." He handed the site plan back to Vince. "You've got a problem with it. Call the city." "I will." "Good," he said, "because I am not stopping a project every time you decide a line on an old map is more important than a permitted improvement." That was when I understood what I was dealing with. Derek did not think he was taking a risk. He thought he was too important for the risk to apply to him. I went inside, opened my laptop, and pulled up the scanned closing papers from when I bought my home. The easement was there, recorded in 1998. The language was plain. It included drainage, inspection, maintenance, repair, replacement, and emergency access. It prohibited permanent structures and obstructions without written consent from the benefiting parties. I called the city planning counter. The person who answered gave me the answer I expected. Private easement disputes were usually civil matters, and the department could not interpret title documents over the phone. But I did not argue. I asked for the approved permit file. That evening, I downloaded every public document attached to Derek's permit number. The plan showed the pool outside the full 12-foot corridor. The contractor had not built it that way. I printed the site plan, my easement documents, and photographs taken from my side of the fence. Then I called a land surveyor named Luis Ortega. Luis had surveyed our block years earlier, during a retaining wall dispute involving a house at the bottom of the hill. He was semi-retired by then, but he still did consulting work because, as he put it, people will always build first and measure later. He came over the following afternoon with a laser rangefinder, a metal detector for property pins, and a battered folder full of county maps. He spent almost 2 hours measuring from the boundary monuments at the side of my garage and the rear corner of Derek's lot. He checked the recorded dimensions, marked the actual corridor edges with small orange flags, and stood quietly near the excavation when he finished. "How bad is it?" I asked. Luis looked at the concrete forms waiting beside the trench. "The proposed pool footprint crosses the easement by 11 feet and 2 inches at the deepest point," he said. "Could they just shift the pool? Before concrete?" he said. "Yes. After concrete? That depends on whether they want to spend a lot of money admitting they should have listened." I asked him what I should do next. He looked at me over his glasses, put everything in writing, give him one clear opportunity to stop, then send the same information to the city and the drainage district. Do not threaten him. Do not touch his work. Do not argue with the crew. Let the record speak. That was exactly what I did. I wrote Derek a short email. I attached the recorded easement, Luis's preliminary measurements, the permit plan, and photographs showing the actual excavation extending beyond the approved footprint. I told him I wanted the work paused for 48 hours so the city and the drainage district could confirm the correct location of the corridor. I ended the message by saying, I want this resolved before the project reaches a point where correcting it becomes expensive for everyone. His reply came back 9 minutes later. Anna, your interpretation of a decades-old document is not binding on me. My contractor, or the city, you are interfering with a legal, approved project. If you contact my crew again, I will have my attorney address this. Then, early the next morning, I heard concrete trucks on Juniper Bluff Court. Derek was not just refusing to pause. He was racing to make the mistake permanent. The first concrete truck arrived at 6:48 the next morning. It came up the cul-de-sac slowly, its drum turning with that steady, hollow churn that sounds almost peaceful when it is not connected to your problem. A second truck followed, then a third. By 8 o'clock, Derek's backyard was full of men in rubber boots guiding gray concrete through chutes and into the deep end of the pool shell. I stood at my kitchen window and watched them pour over the exact area Luis had marked the afternoon before. I could have marched outside. I could have shouted. I could have called Derek every name that came to mind. Instead, I took photographs. I photographed the truck numbers, the permit box, the pool forms, the orange survey flags, the fresh concrete filling the section where the easement crossed his lot. I filmed the workers smoothing the concrete around the drainage cleanout that had been removed from its original location. Then I sent the full packet to the city's building department and copied the Arroyo Crest Water and Drainage District. I did not expect an immediate response. Government offices rarely move at the speed of a concrete truck, but what I did not know was that the drainage district had recently started reviewing old hillside infrastructure after a storm the year before had damaged several properties in a neighboring development. The district took any report involving blocked stormwater access more seriously than it might have a few years earlier. At 10:17 that morning, I got a call from a woman named Mara Chen. She introduced herself as a field supervisor for the district. Miss Mercer, she said, we received the easement document and photographs you submitted. We need to inspect the corridor. Thank you, I said. Do you know whether construction is active today? Yes. They are pouring concrete right now. There was a brief silence. Can you send one current photograph with a timestamp? I did. 20 minutes later, Mara called back. We'll be there tomorrow morning with the city inspector. That was when I realized Derek's permit might not protect him after all. The next day, 3 vehicles parked near my house before 9 a.m. A city building services truck, a white drainage district pickup, and a county survey vehicle. Mara Chen stepped out of the pickup first. She was in her 40s. Small, but easy, and calm in a way that made you think she had dealt with plenty of angry homeowners before. With her was a district engineer named Samir Patel. The city inspector was Colin Reyes, the same man who would later hand Derek the stop work order. Luis came too, at my request, carrying the survey sketch he had prepared overnight. Derek appeared at his back gate when he saw everyone walking toward the rear of my property. He had changed his clothes twice by the look of him. He was wearing a pressed polo, expensive sneakers, and the kind of irritation someone wears when they are trying to look above a situation but cannot stop checking whether the neighbors are watching. What is this? He asked. Mara held up her identification. We received a report of a potential obstruction in a drainage and access easement. We need to verify the location. Derek looked at me. She filed a complaint because she doesn't like the pool. I submitted recorded documents. I said, the district decided to inspect. He took a step closer to the fence. You've been trying to stop this from day one. I asked you to verify the easement. You wanted control over my backyard. No, I said. I wanted the drainage route left open. Mara did not let the conversation become personal. Mr. Malloy, she said. We are not here to resolve a disagreement between neighbors. We are here to confirm whether district access has been affected. Derek folded his arms. You don't have permission to enter my yard. Mara showed him the recorded easement document. This document gives the district access for inspection and maintenance. We are providing notice now and conducting a site review. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Not frightened. Not yet. Just uncertain. Samir walked the rear boundary with Luis. They measured the corridor from the property pins, compared the measurements with the recorded map, and checked the distance between the pool shell and the fence line. Colin stood with the permit plan in his hands. He looked at the drawing. Then he looked at the actual pool. Then he looked at it again. Mr. Malloy, he said, did your contractor revise the pool location after the plans were approved? Derek turned toward Vince, who had been standing beside the equipment trailer. Vince rubbed the back of his neck. We adjusted for grade. By how much? Colin asked. Couple feet. Maybe. Colin pointed toward the deep end. The built footprint is materially different from the approved footprint. The rear retaining footings are also outside the plan. Vince started to explain that the hillside required field adjustments. Colin cut him off gently. Field adjustments do not authorize construction outside the approved site plan. Revised plans are required. Derek's face turned red. So what? We submit revised plans? Mara looked toward the pool shell. Not if the revised location conflicts with a recorded district corridor. Derek laughed again, but this time it sounded thin. This is ridiculous. There is no district corridor. There is an unused gravel strip. Samir opened a binder and showed him a copy of the recorded easement. The corridor is 12 feet wide. Derek shook his head. My title report does not say that. That does not change the recorded map, Samir said. Then Luis handed Mara another document he had found in the county archive the previous evening. It was a drainage management agreement from 1997, recorded before Arroyo Crest had been constructed. It described the same corridor in more detail. It was an emergency overflow path, designed to direct stormwater from the upper lots toward the canyon during severe rainfall. One sentence had been underlined in Luis's copy. No permanent structure, pool, wall footing, or obstruction may be installed within the designated corridor without written approval from the County Flood Control Division and the Water and Drainage District. Derek took the paper and read it. You're telling me this was never in my title report? I'm telling you it was recorded, Luis said. Derek looked at Vince. Did you see this? Vince did not answer right away. Then he said, the architect handled the site review. The architect was not there to defend himself. Colin placed an orange stop work notice inside Derek's permit box. It listed several reasons: construction outside the approved plans, unapproved grading changes, possible encroachment into a recorded drainage easement, and the need for review by the Drainage District and County Flood Control. The notice required all work to stop immediately. Derek stared at it like it had personally insulted him. You can't just stop everything, he said. Colin's voice remained flat and professional. I can stop unapproved work. You may appeal, you may submit revised plans, but no additional construction can proceed until the violations are resolved. Derek looked at me again. This is on you. Mara closed her binder. No, she said. This is on the person who built before confirming the legal constraints on the site. For the next 2 weeks, the construction site sat completely still. The pool shell was gray and unfinished. The rebar rusted at the edges. Pallets of travertine tile remained stacked along Derek's driveway. Boxes labeled "Outer Kitchen" sat under tarps. A pair of lounge chairs, still wrapped in plastic, leaned against the garage wall like they had arrived at the wrong address. I thought the stop work order might finally force Derek to negotiate. I was wrong. Instead, a certified letter arrived at my house from a law firm in La Jolla. The letter accused me of intentionally interfering with a lawful construction project and causing significant economic harm. It demanded that I stop contacting city officials, district staff, contractors, and third parties connected to the project. It also claimed that the easement had been abandoned through decades of non-use. I took the letter to Luis. He read it at my kitchen table, then placed it down carefully. "Did you ever block the corridor?" he asked. "No." "Did the district release it in writing?" "Not that I know of." "Then this is pressure," he said, "not law." He explained that a recorded easement can be complicated, but non-use alone did not automatically erase a drainage and emergency access easement, especially one benefiting a public district and connected to stormwater infrastructure. Then he showed me the more serious issue. The county drainage agreement included a notation that the corridor had been designed around the natural grade of the hillside. Any change to the slope, any wall footing, and any structure that redirected runoff needed additional review. Derek's pool was not simply in the wrong place. It had altered the route water would take when the hill got hit by a major storm. That was why Mara had brought in county flood control. A week later, the county asked Derek's engineer for the original grading calculations, the drainage plan, the stamped pool drawings, and any revisions made after approval. The documents they received created more questions. The approved plans showed a 6-foot drainage setback. The recorded corridor was 12 feet. The approved plans showed a shallow, decorative swale near the rear boundary. The actual site had no swale left. The approved plans showed the pool outside the drainage route. The as-built measurements showed it inside. The approved plans showed retaining walls with weep openings and engineered runoff management. The actual footings had been poured solidly across part of the corridor. The county sent a notice requesting an on-site review. Derek called me that night. I almost ignored it. Then I answered, "You're ruining my project," he said without saying hello. "I did not build over an easement." "You knew I was putting in a pool?" "I knew you were building one. I did not know you would put it over the drainage corridor. This could cost me 50 grand. It could have cost you nothing if you had paused when I asked. You don't understand construction." "No," I said, "but I understand a recorded document when it says not to build there." His voice lowered. "You're enjoying this." I looked through my window at my own quiet backyard, the small patio, my potted rosemary, the old wooden bench my father had built for me years before. "No, Derek," I said, "I'm relieved somebody is finally reading the plans." He hung up. Then, 2 days later, the first hard storm of the season hit Arroyo Crest. Southern California rain has a way of making people careless until it suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. For most of the year, the canyon below our homes was dry. The hillside looked stable. The drainage swales seemed unnecessary. The gravel corridors seemed like wasted space. But that storm came down in heavy sheets shortly before dawn. "Achinch, 32 M." My phone rang. It was Mara. "Anna," she said, "we're getting reports of runoff backing up near Malloy's property. Please stay away from the rear corridor. We have a crew coming." I walked to the kitchen window. Water was rushing around the side of Derek's house. It poured across his unfinished patio, collected against the rear wall of the pool, and spilled down the slope toward the homes below us. The drainage route it should have used was blocked by concrete, footings, and the new grade of his backyard. The old gravel strip Derek had called useless was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. It was showing everyone why it had to remain open. If you enjoy stories where someone ignores a warning, tries to hide behind a permit, and learns that old records are stronger than new concrete, subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice. These fights are never really about being petty. They are about what happens when someone decides your rights are less important than their plans. By sunrise, county trucks were on Juniper Bluff Court, and Derek's beautiful pool project had become something much worse than an expensive mistake. The county flood control crew arrived before 7 in the morning. They came with sandbags, portable pumps, a vacuum truck, and the kind of urgency that made it clear nobody was treating Derek's pool as a private landscaping dispute anymore. Water had already reached the lower edge of the unfinished patio. It had filled part of the excavation behind the retaining wall and was pressing against the new concrete shell. A muddy stream ran through the gap beside Derek's side gate and down toward the homes at the bottom of the slope. One of those homes belonged to a widow named Elaine Foster. Elaine was 72. She had lived in Arroyo Crest longer than I had. Her husband had died 8 years earlier, and she had spent most of that time keeping the house because it was where her grandchildren came for Christmas. Atshapt, cinches prezece. I saw Elaine standing in her driveway in a raincoat, while 2 county workers checked the drain near her garage. The sight of her changed the feeling of the entire situation for me. Until then, Derek had treated this like an argument between us, Anna and her paperwork versus his backyard project. But water does not care whose backyard it starts in. It follows gravity. And when someone blocks the system designed to guide it safely downhill, everyone below them gets pulled into the consequences. Rosa Alvarez, the county engineer assigned to the emergency review, arrived shortly after the rain slowed. She was calm, direct, and had the exhausted patience of someone who had likely seen too many preventable problems. She walked the site in a yellow rain jacket, taking photographs and making notes. She inspected the rear wall of the pool, the altered grade, the blocked corridor, the removed cleanout, and the muddy water collecting against Derek's new concrete. Derek stood near the patio with a contractor's umbrella over his head. He looked less polished than usual. His hair was wet. His shoes were covered in mud. The confident man who had told me to make the city stop him now seemed to be searching for someone else to blame. Rosa asked him, "Where is the emergency overflow corridor shown on the recorded plan?" Derek pointed to the rear of his yard. Rosa looked at the pool shell. "No," she said. "Where is it now?" For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he turned to Vince. "Tell her what we did." Vince looked at the ground. "We followed the approved pool layout," he said. Rosa opened the county file. The approved pool layout did not place a concrete structure in the 12-foot corridor. The current construction does. Vince tried again. "The grade changed once we got in there. The owner wanted the infinity edge level with the patio." Rosa looked at Derek. "Did you authorize the grading change?" Derek's jaw tightened. "I hired licensed people. I assumed they knew what they were doing." "That may be," Rosa said, "but the property owner remains responsible for work performed on the property." She was not rude. She was not angry. That almost made it worse. She explained that the county would issue an emergency correction order. Derek had to provide temporary drainage measures immediately. Within 10 business days, he had to submit engineered plans showing how the corridor would be restored. He also had to provide an as-built survey, a full account of the grading changes, and written confirmation from the drainage district before any permit could move forward. The city's stop work order remained in place. The drainage district barred any construction that restricted access to the line, and the county's order made clear that if the site created a continuing runoff hazard, the county could take additional enforcement action. Derek's attorney contacted me later that week. This time, the tone was different. The letter did not accuse me of harassment. It did not threaten legal action. Instead, it asked whether I would consider signing a mutual accommodation agreement. The proposal was clever in the way bad proposals often are. Derek wanted me to grant a new route along the side of my property. In return, he would install decorative fencing, improve my side yard, and pay for a new gate. The new route would have been narrower than the existing corridor. It would have run closer to my kitchen windows. It would have placed district access through a portion of my yard that had never been designed for trucks, drainage, or emergency use. Most importantly, it would have allowed him to keep much of the pool exactly where it was. I read the proposal twice, then called Mara. She had already seen a similar request from Derek's engineer. "It will not work," she said. "Because I don't agree to it? Because the grade is wrong? The width is wrong. And the existing route serves a drainage purpose that cannot be shifted by a private agreement. Even if you wanted to grant access, the district cannot approve a substitute corridor that does not function." "So what happens now?" There was a pause. "Mr. Malloy has to restore the original corridor," she said. "What he does with the pool after that is his problem." I told his attorney no. Not angrily. Not dramatically. I wrote, I will not surrender or relocate a recorded drainage and emergency access easement in order to preserve construction that was placed there without required approval. That was the last direct communication I had with Derek's legal team. The engineering review took nearly a month. During that time, his backyard became a monument to stalled ambition. The tile stayed stacked in the driveway. The outdoor kitchen cabinets sat under plastic sheeting. The expensive fire lounge fixtures remained in boxes. A massive white sign reading "Stop Work Order" stayed taped to the permit box near the sidewalk. Neighbors talked. Of course. Some were sympathetic to Derek. A few said the city should have caught the issue sooner. Others thought the contractor had led him into a bad situation. A couple of people quietly told me they were glad somebody had pushed back because they had seen runoff pool around their own yards during the storm. I did not encourage the gossip. I had no interest in turning the street against him. I wanted the property restored before a serious storm damaged someone's home. Finally, the county issued its formal findings. The report was dry, technical, and devastating. It concluded that the pool shell, rear retaining wall footings, patio slab, and altered grading had obstructed the designated emergency overflow corridor. It found that the construction encroached into the recorded easement and differed materially from the approved plans. It noted that runoff from the upper lots had backed up during the rain event because the channel's intended path was no longer available. The county gave Derek two options. The first was to remove the encroaching construction, restore the full 12-foot corridor, reinstall the cleanout, reconstruct the drainage swale, and submit final inspections. The second was to propose a complete redesign that met all district, county, and city requirements. But there was a catch. Any redesign had to preserve the exact recorded corridor and maintain access for the drainage district. It could not rely on an informal agreement with me. It could not narrow the route. It could not place removable decks, decorative features, or footings inside the easement. There was no realistic version of Derek's original backyard plan that survived those conditions. His pool designer tried to save it first. They proposed removing the sunken lounge and creating a narrow landscape strip along the rear wall. The district rejected it because the pool shell still crossed the access route. They proposed a reinforced removable deck section. Rejected, because drainage crews could not be expected to dismantle private structures during an emergency. They proposed moving the access route 10 feet toward my home. Rejected, because it would not carry the natural drainage flow and would require changes to multiple recorded documents. They proposed a private indemnity agreement. Rejected, because liability paperwork did not restore a blocked public safety corridor. Every attempt ended at the same point. The pool had been built in the wrong place. By the time the final decision came, Derek had spent weeks trying to argue around a fact that could have been avoided with one honest pause before the concrete pour. The demolition started on a Thursday morning in November. I heard the first saw cut shortly after 8. It was a harsh, high-pitched sound that echoed off the stucco walls of the cul-de-sac. The demolition crew placed water sprays around the concrete to control dust, then began cutting the back third of the pool shell into sections. They did not remove the entire pool. The county did not require that, but they had to remove everything inside the corridor: the rear portion of the shell, the concrete deck above it, the retaining wall footings, the drainage blocking slab, and a section of the raised spa that had been tied into the same structure. For 3 days, jackhammers shook the ground. For 3 days, the trucks carried broken concrete away from the house Derek had purchased because he wanted a private California resort. I saw him only once during the demolition. He was standing behind the glass doors of his kitchen, watching the workers cut away the pool wall. He looked tired, not angry anymore, not smug, just tired. I did not wave. I did not smile. I went inside and made coffee. After the concrete was removed, the drainage contractor came in. They regraded the rear of Derek's yard. They installed a new approved cleanout. They rebuilt the rock-lined swale. They laid compacted gravel across the 12-foot access route and replace the steel gate leading to Canyon View Drive. The final inspection took place on a bright morning after several days of clear weather. Mara, Rosa, Colin, and Louise were all there. Mara walked the corridor from end to end. She checked the width, the grade, the cleanout, and the gate clearance. Rosa verified that runoff would once again travel toward the canyon rather than against the homes below. Colin reviewed the revised pool plans, which showed a smaller pool shifted farther toward Derek's house. When they finished, Mara signed the district approval. Colin removed the stop work notice. The permit was not canceled forever, but Derek's original permit was effectively dead. He had to submit a revised project, pay for a new engineering package, rebuild the portion that had been demolished, and follow the corrected plan exactly. Later, I learned the approximate cost. Derek's original backyard project had been estimated at just under $200,000. The excavation, concrete, redesign, engineering review, emergency drainage work, partial demolition, rebuilt corridor, permit revisions, inspection fees, and replacement landscaping pushed the total well past $350,000. That did not include the weeks he lost, the contractor disputes, or the resale value of a backyard that no longer looked anything like the luxury rendering he had shown me when he first moved in. The finished pool was smaller. There was no infinity edge, no sunken lounge, no giant outdoor bar. The patio was reduced. The glass railing was replaced with a simpler, code-compliant design. The rear of the yard had a gravel access lane and a rock-lined drainage swale where Derek had once planned to place a row of expensive chaise lounges, but it was safe. And when the next heavy rain arrived that winter, water moved down the hillside, through the open corridor, and into the canyon exactly as it was supposed to. No backup, no flooding, no county trucks. A few months later, I was locking the access gate after clearing leaves from the gravel route when Derek came outside. The new pool had finally been completed. It was smaller than the old design, but it was still a nice pool. He had added potted plants around the patio and a simple wood fence near the rear edge of the yard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You could have handled that differently." I looked at him. "So could you?" He nodded once, as though he had been replaying the same conversation in his head for months. "I should have checked the documents." "Yes," I said, "you should have." Then I closed the gate and walked back to my house. People think property disputes are always about anger. Two neighbors fighting over a fence, a tree, a driveway, a few feet of dirt. But this was never about a few feet of dirt. That easement was a promise. It had been put on paper long before Derek's pool, long before my kitchen, long before the landscaping and the property values and all the improvements people use to convince themselves that the land belongs only to them. The hillside was there first. The water was there first. And the records were there first. Derek thought an approved permit meant he could build wherever his contractor said he could build. But permits do not erase easements. Money does not erase drainage. And confidence does not change a boundary line simply because someone finds it inconvenient. I did not want revenge. I wanted the access route restored before a preventable mistake became someone else's flooded home. In the end, that was enough. If your neighbor built over an easement behind your home, would you report it immediately, or would you try to work it out privately first? And when does protecting your property become being difficult? And when is it simply the responsible thing to do? Share your take below. And subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice for more stories where patience, evidence, and the law do the talking.